Hello and welcome back to the series on the Exalted Treatise and the Response of the Tao, the 太上感应篇. I have here a slide of the structure of the entire text, just so that you have an understanding of where we're up to. We're in the section on misdeeds. We're actually in the final part of that section before we move on to the last part of the Exalted Treatise, to the series of instructions, actions, etc. Now today we're going to cover quite a few sentences. The first relates to traditional roles. As we know, the Exalted Treatise, its historical context is that it was compiled in the 12th century. But I think what I want to focus on, in fact, are the four virtues that they mention. And hopefully through our exploration of these various characters, the philology of these characters, you'll get to understand the sort of depth and breadth of these ideas and how they continue to be relevant to various roles in our lives today. All of the various virtues here. So I will particularly explore the three, fair-minded, mild-mannered, and harmonious. Okay. So first of all, this character is pronounced as zhong. It's often translated as faithful, loyal, dedicated. And you can see that the character, if we go back to the character, we might think, well, why is it so many different kinds of English translations? The character, the Chinese character in the middle, is made up of two parts, a top and a bottom. So the top part is often literally translated as middle or center. And you can see, of course, that it's actually made up of a box, right? And the vertical stroke goes right down the middle of that box. And it's meant to depict the idea of being right in the center or the middle. But this character was also used in what we see as bronze inscriptions several thousands of years ago. It was also used to mean impartial when they were describing judges or magistrates and when they provided sentencing. And you can see, well, why is it related to this idea of impartiality? Is because when the judge is sentencing, evaluating the evidence, the judge cannot be partial towards the prosecution or the defendant. The judge can also not be partial towards their own emotions, but they have to review the facts objectively according to the precedents, the arguments presented, and obviously the laws. So the judge has to be impartial, and therefore you can see why there was also use of this character. It cannot deviate to either side. It's be right down the center based on the principles. And, you know, a few hundred years later, the character had this lower part, and this part is actually the heart-mind element or radical. Its original form is actually a pictograph of a heart muscle, the beating heart. But actually, in the past, people thought of the heart as the seat of our emotions, where we think, where we feel, and not just the organ that pumps blood around the body. So therefore, any character that has this heart-mind element will often be related to our feelings, our emotions, and our thoughts. So here, when you combine this idea of impartiality with the mind, you have the character of this semantic field of being fair-minded. Now, it might be easy for us to say, okay, well, the judge has these laws that they have to abide by. These are the principles that guide them. What about us in our everyday lives? Well, we use the sage teachings as the guiding principles. And as we know from, for example, the Confucian perspective, there's quite a lot of emphasis on understanding our roles and our responsibilities in those roles. So in each of our roles, for example, as a employee or a member of a team, we need to be able to contribute. As an employee, you need to fulfill your job description, the various tasks that have been set in this particular work period. It could also involve helping with achieving the company or organization's strategic plans. So the work that is involved is to fulfill that role. And therefore, you can see that someone who has this fair-mindedness, based on the fact that they are according with the principles set out in these sort of sage instructions, like the Exalted Treatise, they would dedicate themselves to their work. And this dedication or this loyalty is not related to a particular manager, right? Because, if that manager is replaced, then does that mean that the employee is no longer dedicated or committed? The answer is no. So the dedication is to their role, their job. So not necessary to any individual. They're not dedicated to any colleague. They're not dedicated necessarily to the reward or remuneration. It's because of they're dedicated to the principle and fulfilling their roles in that particular occupation. So that's in the case of work. But this can also be related to home life. So how we interact with members of a family at home after work can also be related to this idea of fair-mindedness. Again, in the texts, the sacred texts, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, for example, you'll find guidelines on how it is that we can, be an older or younger sibling, help and care for parents and elders, etc. So there are guidelines there, and we need to dedicate. This zhong, as it's pronounced, is a dedication to these particular principles, and ensuring that we fulfill our responsibilities in that role. So see that this is relevant to every part of our lives. Okay, the next character then is pronounced as rou, and it's often literally translated as being pliant or flexible. Let's take a look at the character itself. You can see that it's made up of, again, a top and a bottom part. The top part is actually providing the sound of the character, although it literally means a lance, but it's the bottom part that provides its meaning. So this character means a tree, and also it can mean the timber that comes from that tree. And it's the idea that wood, this timber, is most people think it's quite hard. It's not malleable at all. It's very stiff. But yet the wood can be straight, but it also can be bent. For example, if we have to create a wheel. So the fact is that, something as stiff as wood can be bent, then actually us as humans can also learn from this, that we too can accommodate and adapt to the circumstances, adapt to certain people, so that we can get along with others. Now, this adaptation or being flexible doesn't mean that we have to agree with everything the other person says, but sort of understanding the time and the place where we can voice differences of opinion and do so in a respectful way. So that's why we have translated it here as mild-mannered. So it's not to say that you always speak with a soft voice, you're well-mannered. It's the idea that you can adapt to the person that you're talking to, the circumstances that you're in, and to ensure that there's this harmony. in your interactions. And that quite neatly relates to the next word, which is pronounced as shun, and often translated as agreeable or harmonious. You see that this character here is a bit different. It's made up of a left and a right part. It's still two parts, just left and right. So on the left is the character for stream. You see it's made up of 3 vertical strokes that actually are, in the same direction. When you write this character, your brush strokes, your pen strokes are also in the same direction, going down. And just like the photo here, you can see that the flow of water in the stream, runs from the head of the stream out. So it's flowing in the same direction. This is very different from, say, the wind. It sort of blows in whatever direction it wants. When it encounters something, it blows in another direction. But generally, with water, it flows in the same direction, even if it sort of encounters some eddies. So there's this idea that things are flowing in the same direction. They're coming. They're sort of together in that focus. And on the right-hand side, again, the same connotation is the word for head. Now, how does the word head relate? Well, when we say things like, from head to toe, from top to bottom, again, it's this idea that it's flowing in the same direction, sort of going with that flow. And that's how this character achieves its meaning, its original meaning of being harmonious or agreeable. So this, being agreeable is, as we mentioned before, not just simply agreeing to everything, but finding the right moments in which we can we understand at times that in this circumstance, in this setting, it's more important to achieve this harmony between all members of the group or all members of the family than simply stubbornly disagreeing and voicing and wanting to get your way all the time. At times, it pays off. It's better to give way to other people's opinions. So that's the 3 characters I wanted to explore with you. And you can see how, even though there are different translations, how those translations came about is actually that character itself is quite has a breadth of various connotations, and each of those can help us in understanding how it is that we can practice it in our various roles. So there is a need, of course, to adapt to various situations and use different qualities of the mind. Say, for example, we're a member of a team. So perhaps in that circumstance, it's important to, voice your opinion, but also at the end of the day, a decision has to be made. A consensus needs to be reached so that there's an action at the end. So then perhaps at that time, once you've said your opinion, it's important then to be harmonious and go along with the final decision that's made by the majority of the team, for example. So you see how there's nuances to these ideas, but they are very interesting. So the 4 virtues that have been highlighted, speak to our various roles, and you can see that they still remain relevant to us today. We're going to move on now to the next 2 lines. The first is about being boastful, conceited, and the second is being jealous and spiteful. So you can see quite clearly that they are misdeeds. But it's interesting that, most of the time we would think that they're quite separate sort of states of mind, 2 different emotions, and yet they are juxtaposed. So perhaps we can explore why that is and see the relationship between these 2 lines. To particularly to look at the definitions, I'd like to turn to a Buddhist text called the Doctrine of Mere Consciousness. And this is from a school of Buddhism known as the Consciousness-Only School that sort of believes that everything, all the phenomena in this world comes from our consciousness, and therefore it's very important that we understand how our mind works. What are the different mental states that we give rise to? Are they positive? Are they negative? Because if they're positive, they will give rise to a positive, positive environment, positive surroundings and circumstances. If they are negative or unwholesome, then it will lead to further down the track misfortune, suffering, etc. So this sort of fits in very nicely with that law of retribution in these texts, like the Exalted Treatise. So just to cover the definition of, what is conceit, what is jealousy, I'll take some extracts from this particular text. So the first is that, arrogance can sort of conceptualized as two separate ideas. The first is conceit. What is it? So it's to sort of think that you're above others in some way, that others are inferior to you because of their qualities, their talents, or their wealth, their status, etc. And notice, of course, that this is quite subjective, because in fact that person might be quite talented, but in fact you see them as being inferior, and then that leads you to have this conceit or arrogance. The other very common idea that's related is pride. And as it says here, it's this idea that, you are quite proud of, you're very attached to the things that you have. It could be your fame, your fortune, your honor, your name, prosperity, wealth, etc. And that is, I guess you could say, less of thinking how you are relative to others, and you just simply bring that sort of emotional baggage with you in all your interactions, that you just feel proud of yourself, and that comes out in how you interact with others, regardless of whether you think they are, beneath you or not. It's a bit of a different concept. But if we just focus on that idea of conceit, if I use a very simple way of explaining it, so it begins by sort of observing the things and the people around us. So, for example, this person has observed others who are seemingly maybe slacking off, not as intelligent, so they can't fathom the statistics that they've been given. So they're not as good in terms of their work ability, their competencies, and therefore this person feels quite happy with themselves. This conceit. These people are not so good. Therefore, I feel good. I feel better than them. So that's this idea of, in a very simple way, this idea of conceit. Now we turn to the idea, this concept, this mental state of envy. And again, the definition is that, you see someone else seemingly being better in terms of their success or their talent, and what you attach to your own reputation and your own sort of advantage and benefit. You feel that it's being threatened. You feel insecure because of the other person, and therefore you're not at peace. It's quite an unpleasant feeling that all of a sudden you feel insecure, resentful, and therefore it's because of the other person. So the sense of dissatisfaction arises, and sort of the you could say part of this entire mental process of envy. Of course, then it may lead to further things like anger, and then wanting to harm the other person's success, etc. But this is simply looking at how it arises and those sorts of feelings. So to put it in a simple way again, you're looking at the others, people around you, and perhaps this person has more talent, they're more successful, they're more popular, and then as a result, you become quite angry that they are perhaps taking over some of your own popularity, etc. So it gives rise to this unpleasant feeling and dissatisfaction. So if we come back to these two lines and try to cover them together, they are in fact related in some way. And I wonder if you're starting to get this idea of it. So quite simply, it's about the idea that you're comparing yourself to others. And that's what gives rise to this feeling. So it could be my XYZ, etc. You can even add more to this list. If you feel that you're better, then it gives rise to conceit. If you feel that you're worse than them, it gives rise to jealousy. So you can see how your mind is constantly not at rest because there's this comparison, judgment, and then it's all relative to how good am I, and this attachment to how you are and how your image, your self-image, your reputation. So let us sort of start to break down these various elements and see how we can overcome this. For example, this jealousy. First of all, let's look at the idea of position. So what you see here is a stack of various stones. I want you to focus on the stone at the very top. How did it get there? Well, it's able to be at the top of that pile, that stack, because of the sort of delicate, balancing act that's occurring in all the stones in this stack, right? And therefore, this stone is placed at the top, and it's able to achieve that height and position. But it's entirely dependent on all the other stones below it. And that's this idea of, it's the same with this idea of position. If we feel that we are in a more senior position, let's say, for example, we are the CEO of an organization, that would be being the top stone in this stack, then that might make you give rise to some feeling of arrogance and conceit because you occupy the most important position in the organization. But when you put this idea into perspective, you realize that actually there's this mutual interdependence with all the other staff in the company, in the organization, and really we are, regardless of our position, we are one of the cogwheels in the entire machine. So regardless of our position, actually, we're just one part in the entire entity. Without the rest, we would not be able to exist. There's no one who is simply a CEO without other staff members. You can certainly be the boss of your own company, but if you are the manager of others, then you can't be a manager if there's no one to manage. So it's the same idea that it's like different parts of the human body. Actually, it's part of the same body, but so the eye or the nose or the teeth shouldn't feel that they're more important than each other, because actually they make up the same body and it all has to work. Everyone has their bit to play, their contribution to make it all happen. And so therefore, when you realize this mutual interdependence and dependency on various factors for you to be able to work in that position, then that attachment or conceit over that position just falls apart, because you realize how everyone is important Similarly, let's look at the idea of ability. Now, this picture here is, you can see in the middle, a factory line, production line. You've got a half-completed sort of car, looks like, and it's sort of moving along towards the right. Now, what we often see is the completed product, the car that can actually drive on the road. And how does this relate to our abilities? Well, if we are particularly proud and feel puffed up over our own talents, perhaps we have some particular research or some particular abilities that we're very good at, that we teach others. Everyone looks up to us. Everyone looks up to us for those, for that guidance, etc. Then for some people, it may be easy for them to feel that they're better than others because of that ability. But just like the car on the road, the finished product, in fact, when you look at this production line, you'll realize that there are so many things that needed to be added before it got to the end as the finished product. So all these arms out here, yes, they might be robots, but they're adding things before it continues along the track. And similarly, in our lives, in our journey, there are so many people who've contributed to our success, our abilities. Yes, we may have had to train hard, we may have had to wake up every morning very early to train, to study, or do research, etc. But how did those opportunities come about? Oftentimes, it was your family members, your carers, who appreciated that you had a special gift or interest and encouraged you in that, along that path. Then along the way, you would have certain teachers, primary school, secondary school, or even in university, people that might have inspired you. And you may have been your mentor or not, but all these sort of key individuals in your life that sort of pushed you along this path, kept you going, motivated you when times were tough, when things were hard, such that you got to the end, and you were able to achieve that success. You were able to develop very competent abilities, such that you are now able to enjoy the fruits of your success. You're able to then contribute your abilities to others in your work, etc. So you can see how this production line is just like the journey of our lives, in the sense that so many people are contributing to get us to where we are today, and we cannot forget them, and we should give credit to them, rather than thinking that it's actually just us and our abilities. And that helps keep you grounded. It helps make you realize that actually there's so much that I have to do in order to really repay that kindness, in order to ensure that the people who've invested time, effort, and belief and confidence in me when I didn't have confidence in myself, that you are able to contribute back to their lives in some way, or at least to their vision of, for example, helping the community, making a difference to this world, that you are able to achieve that, and continue where they may have left off, where they would have wanted you to use these skills. So of course, when you realize that, then there's no time to be complacent, but to continue working hard, and always to be grounded and humble, because there is so much that you have to do to contribute back. So that helps us in some ways. And, obviously that's only two things out of the very long list, but perhaps it gives you some ideas to help you understand that, this interdependency and this dependency that we have on various factors that have led us to, the things that we're proud of. The second idea then that might also help us is retribution. And I'm going back to these lines because ultimately you have to realize that they're in the section of misdeeds for a reason. Most people might think that how they feel inside. They feel good about themselves. They feel envious of others. Perhaps they don't ever tell others. They don't show it. And they think that these thoughts in their mind are harmless. But are they? Well, the Exalted Treatise tells us that's already a demerit. Having these thoughts in your mind is already accumulating demerit. And you can see that, we're not, looking at points or marks here, but ultimately it harms you. It harms your cultivation and how you see the world. So, I have this photo. You're probably wondering, what's this illustration? This is the Aesop's fable, a very famous one about the fox and the grapes. So the story is that the fox sees some grapes. Not sure if you can see in the top right hand of this illustration, but it's too high and he can't reach it. And so what he does is he gives rise to this, anger, dissatisfaction, and then he just says, "Oh, they're just sour grapes anyway. Not worth my effort," and then walks away. Now, are the grapes really sour? In fact, what the grapes are doesn't matter. But the poor fox has actually already, experienced suffering in the sense that, he's he or she has, felt dissatisfied. These unpleasant thoughts have arisen, and in many ways, it's like these lines here that perhaps no one might ever know. The grapes are not harmed. If they are sweet, well, who cares? No one might believe this fox, but ultimately, you harm yourself. Whether or not the person that you're jealous of, person that you feel is inferior to you, is ever, aware of your thoughts, is ever harmed because of your thoughts, you actually harm yourself in experiencing this unsatisfaction, anger, etc. So even if it's in our thoughts, it still counts as a demerit. And that's the important thing to note here. And the other thing is that the collected commentaries of the Exalted Treatise provides us with several stories of how these thoughts often lead people to do things and say things that they might later regret. And it's because their judgment is completely clouded by these negative emotions. So there's very dramatic stories of people who, because they've been envious, they have harmed others. Those people were completely powerless. But as a result, because of the demerit, they later were harmed themselves and experienced suffering and misfortune because of that. So you can see that oftentimes it doesn't stay within your thoughts. It actually ends up being, your words and your actions, and ultimately that harms not only others, your relationships, but then these demerits lead to misfortune and future suffering. That's something that we have to bear in mind, this retribution. The other thing, not just jealousy, but the idea of arrogance here can be, I guess, you could say we can think about and overcome this arrogance by realizing that everything that we have, the good fortune that we're enjoying, whether it's our fame, our status, our salary package, has all come about because of accumulated merits from our past. But the question is, how much merit do you have? And no one really knows. So no one really knows when this good fortune will be exhausted. Let's say, for example, you're an entrepreneur, you're you're a business. Who knows whether tomorrow there might be another startup company, another new innovation, technology, a new talent that changes the entire face of the market, and therefore changes the fortunes of your business. So you can see how because you don't know how much fortune or merit that you have left, it's important not to be complacent, but to keep going and cultivating. The question then is, how is it that we cultivate, not just overcoming arrogance and jealousy, but what do we do such that we don't ever, conduct these misdeeds? Well, actually, the Exalted Treatise provides us with the answers. In the earlier section, it talks about how we see others as oneself, to view someone else's gain as our own, their loss as our own. So the idea then here is that if something good happens, we don't if something good happens to others, we don't feel jealous or annoyed that it didn't happen to us, but actually we feel genuinely happy for them. Now, this genuine happiness means that, it's not about how much this person's success benefits us. Now, sometimes people only feel happy that someone else has succeeded because it in some way benefits them. Say, for example, your friend has just got a promotion, and therefore you feel that, oh, this is really great because now this person has better connections, I can network with them, etc. And their different networks are going to be more important, influential, etc. So you're happy because you benefit in some way. But this viewing someone else's gain as our gain means that you're happy regardless. You're simply happy. There's no second thoughts. And it could be anything. It could be that they got a new job, a promotion, they got a new phone, they're happy about it. Or it could be in terms of their cultivation. They have realized something, and they feel very good about it. Well, then this is our opportunity to develop merits. How do we do that? We're actually happy for them. And this happiness is a merit. You're seeing their gain as your gain, therefore you would be happy. And that in itself is a merit. So you are accumulating merits by doing this. It's a very easy way of accumulating merits. And it also, in many ways, combats this envy, this spitefulness that we looked at in the previous sentence. So genuinely feel happy for them is something. And then the second one is to, if they lose something, actually feel sorry for them. And not, secretly happy that, their successes are not as are hindered in some way. So that is it would be a misdeed to feel happy at their loss or their failures. But it's important for our cultivation, for our merits, if we view their loss as our loss, because then it helps you break down this attachment to yourself and your own benefits. And it helps you to think in their shoes, to see them as yourself. So you see how the answers are already in the beginning of the Exalted Treatise. So the idea is that these two are related. They make you your mind's not at peace, constantly comparing with others. Important thing is to try to let it go and see others as yourself and really celebrate with them or really commiserate with them. Okay, the next few lines are about family and in particular marital relationships. I've sort of grouped them together because of that. And I think that what the key words here is harmony, respect, and duty. So this marital harmony is sort of based on this mutual respect. And this mutual respect is also then based on how each party, each person in that relationship contributes by fulfilling their responsibilities and their duties in how the different household chores are divided, how the bills, etc., are divided. So each person contributes, and I guess what often happens, what we often hear about, is that over time, people start to only focus on the negatives. They only focus on the weaknesses of the other person without remembering to be grateful for all the things that the other person has contributed. By honing in on what they haven't done, you've lost the bigger picture of what they have done. Not just today, but in this entire sort of relationship that you've had with them, by only honing in on the weaknesses or what they haven't done, then it leads to disrespect and disharmony. Obviously, disrespect for one's spouse would then lead to disrespect for their parents, their family, their relatives. And again, in order to counteract that, to overcome that, then it's important to be grateful. Be grateful not only to your partner, but to be grateful to the people who've nurtured, who have guided them, their family members. So the heart of this is really understanding harmony, respect, and ultimately fulfilling one's duties in the relationship. I want to move on now towards sort of an extension of this idea, and it's the idea of irrelevance towards ancestors, as well as disobeying instructions of superiors. And now it's not just sort of disrespecting family members, it's actually disrespect towards people who've passed away. Now, commemoration of our ancestors was something that is a very long-standing tradition in Chinese history. In fact, archaeological excavations have uncovered from artifacts from dated to thousands of years ago that are the inscriptions or objects that were used in the commemoration of ancestors. So you can see this is not a concept that is new, but is a long-standing tradition. The collected commentaries of the Exalted Treatise explains that this reverence to ancestors begins from, even at the stage of their funeral proceedings. So the moment they pass away, for example, our parents, we have to conduct the funeral ceremony, the burial, with the utmost detail to all the different aspects and with that reverence. But it also includes later in life the idea of cleaning the grave, the site. This is still a modern day Chinese and festival, and also in various Asian countries, the Qingming tomb cleaning festival, in which in that period of time, families will go to clean the grave sites of their ancestors, but also it's a time to commemorate, as you can see here. And every part of that process, it's not just about going through the motions, but it's about one's attitude towards those who've departed. Now, this is not just simply at the grave site, but also in many Asian countries, people have an ancestral hall or even a memorial tablet that is placed in a small altar table in their homes, so that they can always remember the legacy of their parents and grandparents, and other ancestors. And I guess the idea, as I said, is not going through the motions, but it's that educational value. You can see here in the picture the father pay his respects, and the children understanding that our ancestors are not people who are outdated, outmoded. What they say doesn't matter, but actually appreciating their contributions to our lives today, and understanding how it is that we can continue their work, continue that legacy. So that's the idea of reverence towards ancestors, and how it sort of contributes to the family coming together, not only respecting those who've passed away, but even elders in elderly family relatives. And this sort of goes on very nicely to the idea of the instructions of superiors. In the Chinese, the idea of superiors literally translates to the orders of the emperor. And what you can see here in this photo is a modern day sort of enactment of what happened in the past, that, the emperor has this order, the various government officials go to the villages, the local officials will gather together the villagers, open the decree from the emperor, and read it out so that everyone understands. As we said in previous weeks, not everyone was literate, so it was important that it was not only read out, not only sort of placed in the town centre, but also read out so everyone knew. And so this idea of the emperor's decree is very similar to the idea of the ancestors, because the emperor was probably someone that you would never see in your whole life. The travel, the technology in those days was not as high tech, and you may just simply spend your entire life in this province. You may never travel to the capital, and so people this is someone that they would never meet, but they were respectful. They knew that there was an emperor somewhere in the capital, and they knew that they had to respect these decrees. And even if you were in the capital as an official, didn't mean that you had an audience with the emperor every day. Even if you had an audience with the emperor, you may not directly look them in the face. You may, in fact, just sort of read out what you needed to say. So it was this idea that you would pay respects to this authority because of their role, that they had this ultimate responsibility over the empire. And this has very good parallels with the head of the state these days. Most of us may never meet the head of the state face to face. We simply feel that we know them through media, through the news, etc. And yet they are an important presence in our lives. That the legislation filters down to every level of government, and including our lives. Legislation around fair trading affects our shopping. Legislation around businesses, taxes, etc. And we have to abide by these various regulations. So here, what it says here, disobey. So it's not to say that we have to have absolute obedience, but there is this, I guess, this fundamental understanding that rules, laws, regulations, legislation is in place for a reason. And we learned to abide by these laws, be a law-abiding citizen. If we have questions, if we have opinions about the legislation, we find loopholes, for example, then there are certain channels by which we can voice our ideas. But, in the initial period, it is about understanding these regulations and abiding by them to the best of our ability. Voicing dissent, voicing opposition occurs according to, with the relevant channels, with the relevant authorities and people. So this idea shouldn't be mistaken as absolute obedience, but simply the idea that there's this respect towards people that we may never meet in our lives, but respecting their role, their responsibilities. Okay, and I'm going to move on to the last sentence that we'll cover today, and that is to do what is not beneficial and harbour a treacherous mind. We're going to cover this first of all, the idea of benefit. This is very important that we define it correctly. What is it? What is this? What does it mean to benefit? Who is it beneficial to? First of all, the benefit here is when it is of benefit to our cultivation, to the cultivation of our merit. And so it's not sort of merely benefiting us in terms of our wealth or our health. Obviously, having learned the Exalted Treatise, we realize that these health, wealth, etc., is good fortune that we will achieve if we have the accumulated merit. So this benefit then is in relation to benefit for us in terms of our cultivation. But what exactly is beneficial is not necessarily based on our observable actions. I'll give you a very quick example. For example, say you are volunteering for a charity. Now, at face value, this is excellent. But what about if you've been at this organization for a long time, you're very senior, and you use your authority to bully others, newbies who come in, and you get them to do the jobs that you don't want to do? Well, that would actually not be beneficial because you're sort of hindering the image of this charity, and people may not want to volunteer there anymore because of their interactions with you. So you can see that what should be considered beneficial is not just based on our actions, but actually based on our state of mind, the attitude that we have at that particular moment. This is actually very subtle because it's not just saying that we have the state of mind that we want to help others. And I want to take an extract from a text called The Complete Works of Zhou Anshi. And this is something that we've discussed before, this particular commentary. The scholar Zhou Anshi, or Zhou Mengyan, lived in around the 17th century. He was a very well-known scholar, Confucian scholar, but also a very eminent sort of Buddhist practitioner. So much so that the master Yin Guang particularly recommended his text. So I'm taking a sort of extract from that to help you understand, I guess, the nuances of and the subtleties of our mind, and how that actually determines our good fortune or our misfortune. So the first is, based on what we see around us. We may see some people who are wealthy, but they cannot derive any enjoyment from it. In other words, they should be living a very carefree lifestyle based on their wealth, but they're always stressed, they're always worried, and so therefore they're not really enjoying their life at all. So why is that? It's based on their state of mind when they were giving. And this giving is not just giving of wealth. Obviously, there's giving in kind, resources, giving your property, giving your time, giving your knowledge. In the case of wealth, generally it's giving in kind, so your property or your wealth, okay, to receive wealth as the effect, the outcome. So this person is wealthy because in the past they gave wealth or property. But when they did so, they did it without sincerity. Perhaps they were expecting benefits. Perhaps they felt pressured because other colleagues were also donating. The other cause is that after they made the gift, made the donation, helped out, they regretted it. And so because they were unwilling when they were giving, they weren't happy about it. So the effect is that they are wealthy. They do achieve good fortune, the good fortune of wealth, but they can't enjoy it. You see how the cause is very much related to the end result, the outcome. What about people who have no wealth, but they're actually living this affluent lifestyle? And that's because they depend on others. They may be working for someone, helping someone manage their property. And the owner of that property is away. They have to live in that property, use it, etc. So they don't own that property, but they're enjoying that lifestyle. Why is that? Because the person in the past, it could be their past life, encouraged others to be generous, but they themselves didn't give anything, didn't give of their own property or wealth. The other cause is that perhaps when they saw the good deeds of others, they were very happy, seeing another person's gain as their own, seeing another person's loss as their own, that kind of frame of mind, that they were happy that, this person was doing good, but they themselves did not actually give anything of their own. And therefore, as a result, they can enjoy the lifestyle, but they are dependent on others. It's not their own property or wealth. Another kind of instance is when we see someone who's initially wealthy, but then later becomes poor. Why is that? Simply that they gave, but then they regretted it. And that changes the outcome, doesn't it? Someone who's initially poor, but then later wealthy. Well, perhaps they were encouraged by others. They felt pressured and they only gave a little. But actually later they felt very happy with their decision. So they gained the good fortune of wealth because they either gave their property or their wealth, but they have to experience this initial suffering of poverty. So again, it relates to their state of mind. What about a person who's very generous, but they have limited good fortune? It's because it's related to when they were giving. They were insincere, disrespectful, unwilling, or they were really arrogant. The other cause is that they were giving to an organization that was perhaps detrimental to society in some way. They thought it was probably useful, but actually it's not. Now, this idea of cultivating our merit or our good fortune can be analogous to cultivating a field, like a farmer. This is the analogy used in the book, that if we want to have a great harvest, we need to find fertile land, arable land. So what is the fertile land in terms of cultivating our merit? It's actually our mind. And so we need to ensure that we have the right attitude. It's also in relation to who we give it to, who we contribute, who we help. So in the next circumstance, there's a person who might have not given very much, but actually receive abundant good fortune. And that's because it's the opposite, that they gave with sincerity, respect, they were happy about it, and they were not expecting anything in return. So they were very sincere in their giving. And they were giving to those who benefited others. So, for example, faith leaders, people who, are trying to promote these sage teachings, this kind of education, etc. And then the final sort of two circumstances that I'd like to talk about is being very generous, but then the good fortune is insignificant. That sounds similar to the previous circumstance, the previous slide, but it's a bit different. So why is it considered insignificant good fortune? Is because the person who, they might have donated a lot, might have offered their time, effort, etc., but they did so without giving rise to the thought of achieving enlightenment, of becoming a sage, and then being able to help all beings. So this idea that, when you are giving, you have to give with the right mindset from at least the Buddhist perspective, ending the suffering of reincarnation and being able to achieve the level of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. So this idea of being enlightened. And, from that perspective, everything else is insignificant. The good fortune that you have, it could be wealth, it could be health, only lasts one lifetime. Compared to enlightenment, for example, for Pure Land Buddhists, reaching the Pure Land, that stretches over infinite lives, and not just one lifetime. And then the limited contribution, the second idea is that you give very little, but actually the good fortune that you achieve is very significant. And that's because you dedicate all your work to becoming a sage, to becoming enlightened, and to be able to ultimately help all beings. You have this great heart. You can see that, it could be something very small, but actually because you have this big heart, that leads to significant good fortune, and that contributes to the merits for ultimately achieving enlightenment. So it all is based on the mind. So this idea of what is beneficial is based on your state of mind. You have to have the right state of mind. And, you could be doing something very simple. I'll give you an example. It could be that you're having a meal. Most of us need to eat 3 meals a day. But if you think just of yourself, of enjoying your meal, of, your own health, then actually that's very limited. If you think of this meal as something that is important to keep this body working so that you can use this to achieve, to accumulate more benefit, accumulate more merit to help all beings, then actually the scope of that merit is multiplied. And then you can see how then this relates to the next sentence, which is to harbor a treacherous mind. That, whatever you're doing in your interactions, you're not focused on the other person. You're not thinking about fulfilling your responsibilities, benefiting the other person. You're only thinking about your own interests. So, it goes back to these various virtues. Are we thinking about, being fair-minded, being dedicated, being harmonious, or are we only thinking of ourselves? So that's this, these 2 lines. Hopefully that gives you food for thought and helps you evaluate the various activities in your life and the kind of mind that you bring to it so that you can really maximize and multiply your merits. Okay, so based on the time, we'll have to end our discussion there today. Thank you very much for your kind attention and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.